Good afternoon, Salt Lake City. Welcome to episode 37, Alan?
37 or 36?
37, I think,
Okay.
of Talk with Ted, a show about nothing. My name's Ted McBride. I'm a lawyer here in Salt Lake City. We've got a great show lined up for you today. I've got another Skidmore College. Let's get the sound just right. I'm struggling with the technology today. I'm not on Facebook yet.
Yeah, you are. Should be.
My computer's dying.
Oh, just hit refresh.
I need my cord. But we've got author Christine Ristaino. She has sent me an email or a text phonetic on how to pronounce her last name. I'll still struggle with it and get it wrong no matter what. But she's going to be on, and she's a professor and author of a book called All the Silent Spaces. And Christine was a classmate of mine at, that's better, Alan, at Skidmore College back in the 80s. And back in the mid-2000s, 2007 or so, she was the victim of a violent assault and robbery in which she was physically assaulted quite violently in front of her two young children and robbed, I believe. And that experience caused her to do some studying of the incident. She found herself, as part of victims groups and various things, and she found that she was often approached with the question of the race of the person that assaulted her. And so she set out on a bit of a journey to explore that issue of race in this context of being a victim and the role of that in society and why that question came up so early, so often. And that project morphed into a larger project, which culminated with the publication of her book, which is released today, called All the Silent Spaces. And in that book, Christine confronts not only this more recent incident, which happened now, I think, 11 years ago, but also some incidents in her past that she's very open about. When she was a child, she was molested when she was a young child. And she also had an experience in college in which she was raped. And this is no secret. She's very open about it. That's what her book's about, as well as this incident, racism, a number of other things. She's a fascinating woman, a professor at Emory University. She teaches Italian, among other things. She talks a mile a minute. It's going to be one of the easiest interviews we've got. It's going to be like, go, what do you do? Go, and she'll go. But she'll be with us in the second segment. It was a good week, 4th of July weekend, coming off the long weekend and kind of hard back at work. It's a good week to dig into it. Court tomorrow, Alan, so always get motivated to go to court.
Big day.
Last week we were, in the past we've talked, I always got to ramble on a bit in the first segment. So I've got a little topic to ramble on about today. We've talked about the railroad here in Utah. Last week I talked about global warming and our amazing reservoirs here in Utah and the water system. And I had a different experience this week that I actually tried to do a few weeks ago, but I got lightninged out as we got over to the Bingham Mine, the Kennecott Mine over in the southwest corner of the Salt Lake Valley. Anyone that's ever flown in when the weather's blowing the right way and the planes are flying in that way has looked down and marveled at that gigantic open pit. And there's a copper mine here. So in contrast to the water of last week, talk a little bit about the rock this week. And I'm going to segue that into a little bit of sort of the new economy here in Utah and ultimately corporate responsibility. And I'd like to get somebody on the program, Alan, that is really got a thriving company. Kennecott's an old company that's contributed more wealth to the Utah economy than any other company single-handedly. So they've supported a lot of families and have contributed a lot of wealth to our economy. And now we have a new influx of wealth in Utah in the form of Silicon Valley and sort of a new culture of millennials and young purchasers, and I think consumers that are interested in how their products are made and how their corporations treat their employees, their culture, their corporate culture, because I think that the definition of that is changing. It used to be just some basic benefits, but I think that corporations are reaching out to provide benefits to not only specifically their employees and shareholders and stockholders, but communities at large. And what comes to mind on that was a guest we had on the show, Stuart Goffman, the creator of Addiction Unplugged, a television show that highlights the great efforts and heroics of people in the recovery community. And that'll be aired on A&E TV on July 20th. He was a great guy. A great interview. And one of the things that he highlights, and I've spoken about this before, I think I'm 37 episodes in, maybe I'm running out of things to say.
I doubt it.
Mike Lindell, the owner of, is it My Pillow? I get it mixed up.
I think it's called The Perfect Pillow.
The Perfect Pillow in Minnesota. And the lengths that he goes to hire disenfranchised people, folks coming out of jail, folks dealing with recovery issues. And we even spoke about some stigmatism, some companies afraid to come out with that reputation that they're hiring those types of people. And I think that creates a little bit of a conflict for corporate America because they need to do that in order to really care for those folks that they employ. And they've got that little bit of conflict, afraid to come out with it. And so I think it needs to be celebrated, and I think there's a platform for it, and that it'll maybe drive some consumerism as well. That was sort of the culmination of the opening bit that I have, so I'm a little bit out of order. But last week I had on Malcolm Lemons from, we got the phone ringing? Malcolm Lemons, a delightful young guy, grew up in Washington, D.C., played basketball, college basketball at Niagara, and then transferred, I forget the name where he transferred, in California, played a couple of years of professional basketball in Japan, learned to love to write, wrote a book, and is now helping athletes do brand identity and better their overall societal skills to help them transfer out of the game into society at large. He was a great guest. We were talking about the NBA G League. Then they had the earthquake down in. We had seen Rudy Gobert just the day before. Well, Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell were down in Las Vegas when that earthquake hit, and affected that NBA G League game. They quoted Rudy Gobert saying that he never got dressed so fast to get out of the hotel. It's interesting because on this show months ago, we spoke about I was kind of obsessed with Fukushima Daiichi in Japan and the great earthquake and tsunami from 2011. And I had on the program Dr. Luther McDonald, a radioactive environmental scientist at the University of Utah. We discussed that hazard, his concerns associated with it. But anytime I see an earthquake, I think about that another big one coming in Japan. So I found that interesting over the weekend. I live in a house that's got some bricks around it. It's not too stable, but we hope we don't get one here in Salt Lake City. On another note, one thing I neglected to talk to, it always happens, I mentioned going into commercial break, I'm going to raise an issue and then I forget to do it. Colin Kaepernick, the football player, that we all know associated with the protests and the singing of the national anthem. And Colin Kaepernick took a knee back in 2016, caused a bit of a national uproar that's still going on today, manifested just last week in the proposed sale of some Nike sneakers, which were then pulled off the market. And Colin Kaepernick was a superstar. I think he won a Super Bowl. But he's been a Nike athlete since 2011. And it was in 2016 that he took the knee. And he didn't sign with another team after 2016, although he's still been in the news. He's got kind of quite a cult following, if you will, of supporters. And he's got, of course, a number of people that are staunchly against him as well.
Right. Which is good.
Nike, I find right now, so they put out this sneaker that had the Betsy Ross flag on it, the 13-star flag. And I haven't seen a picture of it. I just know this sort of in broad terms. But Colin Kaepernick, then, who is supported by them, objected to it that flag represented a time when America endorsed slavery. And so then Nike pulled it. And so that, you can imagine, sparked this debate and has people polarized again. And I've got to believe that Nike is capitalizing on it somehow. And Nike reminds me in some sense of Donald Trump, to sort of go in there and stir things up, let the battle rage a little bit, and somehow you're going to come out better off, that you're going to get more support than you would have otherwise. But that's how, and Nike's also got a history of, employing children overseas, underage workers, etc. And so I look at that situation with Colin Kaepernick and the people that oppose him, and I find it interesting and really kind of misguided, because I think that the flag represents a symbol, and the national anthem, and the ceremony before the football game is a ceremony, and it's a symbol. And Colin Kaepernick is associating certain things with that symbol, say the flag in general, and he is making a rather specific protest that, in his mind, he's associating police brutality against young black people with sort of the current condition of America. And I think that what he's doing is making that protest in sort of that narrow form. Now, whether others have want to expand it or grow it, I think that's sort of where it originated from. I think that, and I don't speak for everyone, but in large part, the people that oppose him and say that he's unpatriotic, et cetera, and in fact, we just saw it play out in the women's soccer, where I don't have her name at the tips of my fingers, but it was the woman who scored the winning goal in the finals game that did the same thing as Colin Kaepernick and took the knee during the national anthem a week or so ago and came under great scrutiny. But the people that then oppose it, they want to attribute a dramatically different meaning, a symbolic meaning to that flag. And I'm not taking issue with anybody's symbolism with the flag. And I know one thing that you can associate with the flag in a very meaningful way is D-Day. And, the men that charged those beaches in Normandy, knowing that the great odds that they were going to die, not make it to the cliffs, and great heroics and sacrifices and the wonderful things of this country. And I suppose including that wonderful thing to protest, which is what Colin Kaepernick is doing. But what I find ironic about it is that there's such animosity surrounding it when we're really talking about two different things. Because Colin Kaepernick is talking about it, is seeing something different in that flag than those, say, good veterans, American patriots, however you want to define them. Someone called them right-wingers, how they want to see it. And so what I see sort of misguided about it is they're fighting over what looks like the same thing, but is really a different thing. Because I do believe that Colin Kaepernick has got in his heart the good well-being of our nation. Nike, that's another story, topic for another day. We're going into the first commercial break. I'm running over it. I'm rambling on. I've got my plug. I'm going to plug into Facebook Live, and we'll be right back with Christine Ristaino, author of All the Silent Spaces. Talk with Ted. I'll be right back. Welcome back to Talk with Ted, a show about nothing, number 37. I called it a show about nothing because of the great Seinfeld show. And for the folks that are offended by Seinfeld or don't watch it, I know that unbelievably there are some out there. They did an episode of where Jerry did a pitch of about a show about nothing. And Seinfeld was really a lesson in life about less than perfect people doing not great things, but it was made for some great laughs. But I'm a product of the 80s and 90s, the 70s as well, as is my guest, Christine. Can you hear me?
I can definitely hear you.
Excellent. We're going to get your sound just right. I didn't even try with your phonetic attempt for me to pronounce your last name.
Nobody can pronounce it but the Italian. So I figured
do it for me.
Sure, it's Ristaino.
Ristaino.
Perfect.
Simple enough.
Wow, that's more simple than I thought.
That A before the I, kind of throws you off.
Yes, it does. People want to say, Ristaino is a favorite. The only time that I don't have to spell it out for people is when I'm in Italy and I start to spell it out and then they say, no, we got it.
Ristaino. And is that Italian? Is that a dumb question?
Yes.
First dumb question of the day. I'll get it out of the way.
No, it's not.
No,
dumb.
if you don't know where she's
no
from.
No question is a dumb question.
Well, I'm looking at your bio, and it says teaches Italian and is the faculty advisor for a number of programs related to social justice at Emory University.
Yes.
So with me giving you that little feed, why don't you introduce yourself to the hopefully more than a few listeners here in Salt Lake City?
Okay, great. Well, I see a few people I know who are watching online, so that's exciting. I've brought a few people from outside of Salt Lake.
And it's a big day for you. You're an author, and you've got a new book, and it was released today.
Yes, and I couldn't think of a better person to talk to about it with. So my name is Christine Ristaino, and I grew up in a small town south of Boston, and I studied Italian eventually on a long, windy road. I eventually studied Italian, but I did a lot of other things before that, and then lived in Italy for a while, went to graduate school, and eventually ended up in Atlanta, Georgia, teaching Italian at Emory University. And I have 2 children, and All the Silent Spaces is about a time in my life when my kids were 3 and 5. And that moment in my life changed everything. So it's interesting, and I'll tell you more about it, but it's so interesting how life trajectories are born, because the things that you least expect send you in a different direction.
Isn't that the truth? And I don't know what to expect. So I really don't know where I'm going.
Well, I can relate with that.
And that's okay, Ted.
So a little time overseas. What year were you there?
So I was there for the first time in 1993. I went again and stayed for about 6 months in 94. In 97, I went again. Or actually, 95, I was in Italy for about 3 months as well. And then 97, I spent a year there. And I just got back from a 6-week trip to Bologna. And I brought 17 students, and my colleague came with me. And we did all kinds of voyages all over Italy, and it was wonderful. I had such a lovely summer.
You're talking most recently here.
Yes, about a week ago. I returned.
Wow. Field trip with the college kids?
Yes, it was wonderful. And I eat so much food. I can't even begin to tell you.
Wow, that sounds awesome. In the 90s, were all of those in Italy?
Yes.
And
I traveled to Italy. I traveled a bit outside of Italy, too, but I was studying Italian, so I wanted my focus to be on Italy. And when I decided that when I went to a city, I would really explore that city. So I was in Rome for about 6 months, and I just stayed there, and I would walk around the city and try to find all the magic that's hidden there. We're out in the open, actually.
did you study Italian at Skidmore?
No, I studied business, and I minored in English.
Because
And,
in the 90s,
I
then
got-
you're in your early 20s, mid 20s?
Yes.
So you took that
Yes.
up sort of after college?
I did. A friend and I picked a city, and we moved there. A friend from Skidmore, and we moved to Seattle, and I had a great adventure there. And then while I was there, I started working doing administrative work for a Romance Languages department, and then I just started taking Italian for fun, and realized that I loved it, and that I loved traveling, and I changed my career path. I got a second BA at the University of Washington, and then I went to graduate school and got an MA and a PhD at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill.
Oh, wow.
So it's I'm I'm happy about my choice. I was doing, I love the university atmosphere, and so that's why I went and found a job at the University of Washington. But I couldn't have predicted that I would fall in love with Italian.
What year were you at Chapel Hill?
I arrived in Chapel Hill in 1995, and then I moved to Atlanta. I guess it was in 2001, and started working at Emory in 2002.
Okay. And was that your first teaching job at Emory?
No, it's interesting. They throw you right into the classroom when you become a grad student. So I had a week's worth of training, and I knew how to speak Italian, but then they trained me for a week, and then I was in the classroom after a week of training. And I remember the moment that was the most frightening was the moment before I opened my mouth. I stood there, and some of the students looked older than I was because I'm super short, and they all towered over me, and I was young, and so I remember being terrified, and then I started talking, and it was fine, and I loved it.
I was scared to death when I was in law school in 1990, the fall of 1990. I was scared to death to open my mouth.
Yes, it's terrifying initially.
And then, you grow up, you forget how young you were.
Yeah.
So
you forget why it's so scary.
Yeah.
Good question.
And those professors were so intimidating.
I know. Why? And, you think about it, at least I think about it now, they're people. Professors are people. And people are people. I remember being terrified to open my mouth about anything when I was at Skidmore with you, Ted. I was afraid to talk about my feelings. I was afraid, if I liked somebody, I wouldn't tell them. I didn't know how to talk about these things.
Yeah, and I can remember I've spoken about this a couple of times recently. It's going to be a bit of a repeat show with a new guest, but I distinctly remember English class first year at Skidmore, and I got into Skidmore. My grades weren't great in high school. I had a little help from the basketball coach getting in. My SAT scores weren't great, and there was a woman in my class, a young girl, and she ended up transferring because she, could do better than Skidmore. I think she may have gone on to Middlebury or somewhere, but maybe, a little bit of a better school. And I remember she was just kind of disgusted with the quality of my English at the time. And it was a real, shameful experience. And I was ashamed of being, working food service at Skidmore, there. as part of that financial aid package, and those things affect young people.
Oh, they do. I still have a pet peeve with Skidmore now because they're still doing that. And I did work service too, and was in the cafeteria. And I remember, I didn't understand what was going on, the subtlety of it then. But it's really taking the kids that don't have money, throwing them into the cafeteria, and then they're serving food. And so it immediately points you out as somebody who doesn't have a lot of money.
Yeah.
And for me, it never mattered. But then I remember getting to Skidmore and just not quite understanding the dynamic.
Yeah, and it's interesting for those listening not familiar with Skidmore. It's a small liberal arts college in upstate New York, north of Saratoga Springs, up in Jimmer Fredette territory, up near Glens Falls. And it was an all-women's college finishing school until, I think, the early 1970s. And we were there in the mid-'80s. Liberal arts college, wonderful place. And with a lot of kids with money. It was not an inexpensive school.
At the time, how much?
I'm not exactly sure, but it's kind of like Westminster out here. There's a fine liberal arts college out here.
Yeah, right.
It's interesting. You're talking about the 90s, living in Italy. I never lived abroad. I kind of always wished I had. And back in those years, what I was doing was escaping to Utah and learning, trying to figure out how deep the powder was on any given winter. And that's where I ultimately ended up in 1997. I moved to Utah. The Olympics were coming here, and I had fallen in love with the mountains, and I'm a lawyer, and it was kind of lawyer. It's kind of grab your briefcase and go.
And go to Utah.
Yeah, and go to Utah, and it's really it's a very different place now, and it was a great place then, and it's a better place now. But many people have discovered it. There's great tourism here. There's great education here. The taxes are low. The work opportunities are great. The crime is relatively low. We do have alcohol, drug problems like the rest of the country, and homelessness like anywhere else. But I raise those things because I know that we're going to get to your book, but I know that you deal with all of those issues in your capacity as a professor. Am I right?
Yes, I'm very focused on social justice and working with students on those topics, but I wasn't always this way. And it's because of the events of my book that I moved in this direction. So I don't know if do you want me to talk a bit about the book?
Yeah, let me just look at the clock. We got a few minutes going in to the first segment. Introduce us to it.
Okay.
We got 4 minutes. Introduce us to it.
Okay, so my book is called All the Silent Spaces. And I started writing it shortly after my kids and I were attacked in a parking lot. Actually, I was attacked in front of my kids, and they were 3 and 5 years old. And we had gone to a Target store to buy a car seat for my son. And we were safely inside the store, and my kids wanted.
Can I ask you, because I'm the lawyer that's got to just frame everything up. What time of day was it?
It was 7 p.m.
Was it?
So it was still light out.
Still light out?
Summer. Yes, it was towards the end of. It was September 15th, so the end of the summer, and it was still light out. We were having a really good day, and my kids wanted a kiddie cart because they were in just a regular shopping cart, and that wouldn't do. So we went outside to look for one, and we found one across the parking lot. And they jumped in, close to the ground, and I was pushing. And then I got stuck on the curb as I was close to entering the store. And a man stood up, and he walked towards me. He was sitting on a bench. And I said thank you because I thought he was going to help us. And instead, he punched me in the face and immediately broke my nose. So it became very bloody quite quickly. And I don't know if you've ever experienced something that you're completely not expecting, but it's hard to frame and hard to figure out what's going on. So I wasn't sure what was happening.
Did it knock you down?
Not the first punch, but he was trying to get my purse, and I just kept feeling the purse being tugged, and I couldn't understand what had just happened. And I was holding the purse in, and suddenly, then he hit me again a couple more times, and I ended up on the ground. And then I realized what was happening, and I looked up at him, let go of the purse, and I just said, "You're a prick." That was what came out of my mouth. And then he ran away and disappeared, and I could hear this child sobbing. And at first I didn't know who it was, and then I realized it was my daughter, inches away from me, because she and my son were just so low to the ground. And I looked up, and my son's eyes, he was 3, were as big as saucers. And it was interesting to see them witness this whole attack so closely. And so dramatically. And so that's how the book started, really. It's interesting. I don't know how many minutes we have until break, but a few days before this happened, I bought a videotape about stranger danger, and I wasn't sure if I should show my kids because I didn't want them to be afraid of people. I didn't want them to know that somebody... Yes, could hurt them, but I ended up showing them. And the first thing my 3-year-old said was, "Mom, he was a don't know." So he had the language to talk about it right away.
A don't know. You don't know him. You don't want to approach him.
Yeah, exactly. Well, kind of this is a human you don't know.
But he kind of approached you. Can I ask you, and we'll get into more detail, but just a miscellaneous question or two. Where did this happen? Which city?
Atlanta, Georgia, and it happened at a Target store, I guess 20 minutes from my house.
How would you describe the area? Upper class, middle class,
I would say
ghetto?
middle class. It's middle class. And there's schools around, a lot of churches in the area, and it's not, it's not an upper class area, and it's not a lower class area. It's kind of in between.
Back at that time, did you carry anything, any mace or anything like that in the event of something like this?
No, I didn't. In fact, I trust people a lot. I still do, and I still don't carry anything. And I don't even carry a purse, or at least at that time, I never carried a purse. But a friend of mine had given me a purse for my 40th birthday. So I started carrying one maybe 3 months before that. And usually I didn't have one.
That's what he went after. Well, we're going into a commercial break. Years ago, my sister was out here. I got married on September 8th, 2011. I misspoke a week ago and said I got married on 9/11. But she was out here helping out, and she was mugged in the parking lot, broad daylight, Saturday afternoon, 2 o'clock, here in Salt Lake City at the Costco down near 2100 South. Thankfully wasn't injured, but it can happen to anyone, anywhere, including right here in Salt Lake. When we come back, we're going to talk more about the book, and I want to talk about how the inquiry into questions about race that you were asked sort of evolved into this book that you just got published. So we will be right back with Christine Ristaino. Ristaino. Did I get it?
Close.
We'll try again.
I in the middle.
We'll try again. We'll try again when I get back.
Sorry, Ted.
Hang on. Welcome back to Talk with Ted. It's 4:44 on Tuesday, July 9th, 2019, and a very significant day for my guest, Christine Ristaino. Did I get that right that time?
Yes.
Oh, it's easier than I thought. I'm really a complete idiot. I mispronounce about every name of every guest that I have. Well, what better way to develop relations with people than to repeatedly mispronounce their name?
Now
It creates
you
a
got
social
it's not how you say the name. It's the content of what you say.
It's going to be the content of what you say. I've been really fortunate. I spoke to you earlier. I've had some great guests on. This has already been a great show. I know it's going to get better because you've got such a unique story and you've got such courage to come forward with it. And we've spoken on the program about drug addiction and shame associated with it, or whether it's eating addictions or any kind of mental illness, because I think that the definition of mental illness in our modern society is way too narrow, because we all suffer from tremendous insecurities living in this modern, financially dependent, technologically dependent, energy source dependent world that's sort of threatened. And I think that people like you and other guests we've had that kind of step forward, share their the dark side, the dark time of their life, their humanity, and the difficulties that they've had. And your book highlights that, including the fact that you were sexually molested when you were younger and then raped going into your senior year in college. And then one of the things I'd asked you was whether you had opened up about those things to people, family members, and it can have strains on family relations. Or did it take this incident and writing this book to also address those things? And so I'm just sort of telling a little bit of the story, and I'll let you tell it better and in more detail. But I know the broad outline, and I know that you're remarkable. And today's the day. The book comes out today. Where can folks get it?
Well, thanks, Ted. You can get it online, Amazon.com. Barnes and Noble, and wherever books are sold, you can buy it. And there's not an audio version, but there's you can download it as well.
Okay. And how long has it been in the making?
So it's been in the making since 2007. Well, actually, it was just an idea in 2007, and 2008 is when I started writing it. I wrote the first line in a workshop.
How do you keep at it for so many years? I think about writing a book, it seems like such a daunting task. And then when I hear it takes that long, forget it, I'm never going to start.
So it was pretty easy to write in a lot of ways because there was something really driving me to write it. And you mentioned the two events that happened to me when I was younger. Those two events, I thought that they had barely affected me. I said, they've barely affected me. I don't need to talk about them. I'm strong. I'm just going to move on. And basically I did. And it took this third event in front of my children, and my children bore witness to it, as well as a few other people.
But let me stop you. At what point are you saying it doesn't have an effect on me? At what age?
Pretty much my whole younger life until I hit 40. But
let's break it down, because I know that one of the incidents happened when you were young, 8 or 9 years old.
Yes. And I'm not sure exactly what the year was. Was I 8? Was I 9? I'm not sure. I was somewhere around that age, and I was molested by a person, this beloved person that my whole family loved and adored. He was the life of the party. He was a wonderful, wonderful cook, really, really funny. And we just loved him, and he molested me. And I don't think I knew what was going on at the time. And it wasn't until years later where I finally put all the pieces together.
And I know you're okay with me asking you this. This is the the lawyer, the interrogator in me, but was it a single incident? Did it last over a period of time? I'm not sure that it matters, but just to give it a little more context.
Sure. So as far as I know, it happened only once. It's hard to say because my memory of this incident is, some of it is quite precise and some of it is quite vague. And sometimes people who have experienced molestation remember only part of it or some of it or only one or two occasions. So my thought is that it happened once.
And did you have awareness of that as you matured, through your teenage years up until, before this college experience?
Well, I did, but it was, kind of when I was dating people that I really understood what had happened because I started to feel uncomfortable when I was dating men. And there were moments when something they would do would remind me of this event. And, I don't know, if somebody that you absolutely love does something like that, it's very hard to understand and even accept. And I was pretty much in denial about it. I didn't believe it myself. And I think that happens to a lot of people who experience violence or assault or molestation, especially when it's done by somebody that you love. Because how can, there's this duality. You have somebody you love who does all these wonderful things, and the version of that person that everybody has, and then you have this other version, and you either deny the other version and go along with everybody else's narrative, or you talk about that other version, and in the process...
And that other version being formulated in the mind and body of an 8 or 9-year-old.
Yeah. Exactly, who doesn't quite understand it anyways. For me, I got that something was off. I understood that what was happening didn't feel right, but I couldn't put it into any framework, and I didn't until years later. But I started denying my own truth as young as 8 or 9, and I continued to do that for a number of years. I didn't talk about what happened with this person, and then I was...
Did anyone know? Did your family know?
So my family didn't know. I didn't talk with them about it for years, and I did tell in high school. I told a few close friends, and then in college, I was telling you about this experience. When I was in college, after I had been raped, I went back to college, and a few other things had happened that year too. So I was really upset, but I wasn't talking about that either because I think for a long time in my family, we defined strength as not talking about these things. Strength was experiencing something and being strong and not talking about it. That kind of, well, for me, for a while, that was my definition. And if I talked about it, then I was airing my dirty laundry. And I was also weak. At least that's what I thought. No, today I feel the opposite is true. That if you talk about something that was difficult, it shows an incredible amount of strength. And the more we talk about difficult things, the more we realize how much we have in common with everybody. Everybody experiences difficult things. I realized my own humanity by talking about this, and I realized how much I have in common with other people, and became closer with people as a result. But I had a very hard time talking about anything important when I was younger, and I became a mediator, a really good mediator.
The mediator.
The mediator syndrome.
Trying to please everyone.
Trying to please everybody, and also, I feel that I was very good at negating my own truth and just looking at two people and who maybe disagreed, and I was always trying to figure out how I could get them to see each other's viewpoints. And I never brought my own viewpoint into it. I didn't even know what I thought about any given situation. All I cared about was that this person and this person get along, that they start seeing each other's viewpoints.
What
And
age
so
are you describing yourself at here?
So probably high school, college, my work at Emory until I turned about 40. I was always working with colleagues. I was always a mediator. And in fact, when I worked at the University of Washington, I was a really good mediator. And when I left and went to grad school, a person said to me, Christine, when you left, everything fell apart. And there was this big blowout, kind of a faculty blowout. And I felt good that she said, you really helped to keep us together. Now, I don't know if that's true, but she did say this. And then years later, I was talking to somebody from the department, and he was saying how important it was that blowout happened because there were real problems that needed to be addressed. And I didn't understand that at the time when he told me, but years later, looking back, I realized, yes, absolutely. Talking about difficult things is the only way we're going to solve problems. It's not ignoring them. It's not ignoring our own truth.
Yeah, and sometimes conflict. I think political correctism, I've done a bit about that, sometimes just wants to chill the debate and silence people, even if it's a good-natured intent. But sometimes it's good to have conflict. There's growth from conflict.
Yes, I agree. And that's really what happened with my book. I was terrified of not being politically correct, and I was really frightened about talking about race, ethnicity, violence, death, anything difficult, because I didn't want to hurt somebody's feelings.
And it's hard to be politically correct talking about race.
Oh, yes, absolutely. But right after my attack, people started, I had a black eye, I had a broken nose, and a mild concussion, and scratches on my kind of shoulders. And on Monday, I went back to work, and I had to teach 3 classes in this condition. And I, basically, it was interesting because I had to tell people what had happened, and I wasn't used to doing that.
And when you say you had to teach, were there no leave provisions at the school for in the event of that thing at the university?
Oh, there were, but my whole way of interacting with the world was,
You just
I don't
went
need
back.
downtime. Yeah, I didn't even think about it. I didn't imagine that I would need downtime or any time to talk about this. I had dealt with difficult things before. Who needs downtime?
Now, I wonder if you may have felt different if you had been a victim of domestic abuse, if it had been your husband that had done it to you, which many people have to deal with. You didn't. That can have a whole separate layer of shame,
Yes, you're absolutely right, Ted. And I couldn't talk about the other 2 things. Molestation is a form of domestic abuse. I didn't realize that until recently, and I wouldn't talk about that. Like nobody knew about that. But it was so much easier to talk about what had happened in the parking lot in front of my kids. And after that happened, people were looking at me, and the first question out of their mouths was he black, or what race was he? And
that's the issue I tried to get to at the last commercial break. Are we on another one, Alan? Mm-hmm. We're going to be at the top of the hour. We've got the national news coming up here. Christine, if you can hang on for 6-7 minutes. We're going to come back, talk about that question of what race the assailant was and how that inspired and transformed your book, All the Silent Spaces. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to Talk with Ted. Number 37, Christine Ristaino. I hope I got it. I'm still struggling. All the silent spaces. Have we got you on, Christine?
Yes, you do.
We had you muted there. Going back in, it's the top of the hour drive time here in Salt Lake City. It's a beautiful summer day, not too hot, a little bit cloud covered. The traffic always backs up, so I always encourage people to drive safely. But we've got maybe a few new listeners tuning in. It's Fred Flintstone time, quitting time, flying off the dinosaur tail into the car and driving home. But I've got Skidmore College graduate as well as the University of Chapel Hill, North Carolina grad, and now Emory University, is it, or college?
Emory University.
University professor, Italian professor, and author of All the Silent Spaces, a book that is being released today. And the book is an amazing and courageous open journey by Christine, who was attacked 11 years ago and wrote a book about that attack. We're going to talk about racism here in a second, but to segue back in, what I want to do is just read a short bit from the book, just from the beginning of it. I've got the advanced copy here. But in the, let me see what it says, introduction, 10-year anniversary. Okay, if you can indulge me for a minute, Christine, then we're going to get to the to the racism issues. It has been 10 years since the event that inspired this book occurred on a black pavement, a bloodied woman lying in a parking lot while her children stared and sobbed. Since then, the world has changed. It's more fractured, more united in hidden, unspoken truths of a look, a shiver, a hope, a touch. Now, more than ever, we need to engage with difficult topics, reach out to each other, listen to each other in a sea of uncertainty, sit together with the experiences we share, and find common ground. It is my hope this book will create space for difficult conversations, for bearing witness to each other's stories, so we will be less alone in them. Stories owned and shouldered by the world, not just each of us alone. Now more than ever we need this. More than ever we are called to take chances with our voices, so tied as we are to each other in our shared fluency of experience. That's poetic. It's hard to say if that's a regular narrative or if that's a poem. But that's a beautiful introduction to your story and your book. So take us from there.
Thank you, Ted. So I told you a bit about the attack in front of my children and how right afterwards people were asking the race of the attacker. And this was in 2007 in September. And I had a black eye, a broken nose, a slight concussion.
And so let me stop you right there. Was just that common, the race of the attacker?
Yes.
And so I've got to confess, when we spoke yesterday, that was one of the questions that came to my mind that for some reason I didn't ask you. We were on only for a few minutes until you got to this topic. But I found I was kind of shocked by my own conscience and my own natural curiosity to go there that led you to explore further. So I've just got to confess on that point. I didn't say it to you yesterday, but it crossed my mind.
Thank you, Ted, for saying that and for being honest about it. I think a lot of people thought or even asked this question. And initially, I was really angered by the question. And so I would say, and I don't express my anger very often, or I don't feel as though I'm a very angry person, but I would get angry at this question, and I would say, I don't understand why you're asking me this question, in not a very pleasant way.
Like,
And
how far
immediately,
after the timing of the event did this become
Days.
sort of an issue?
days, because people asked me about it because I had a black eye
Days.
and a broken nose. So it was hours even. It was pretty obvious I had been beaten up. And so people were asking me this question, and I just couldn't understand, why are they asking me this? They could be asking me about my kids. They could be asking me how I was doing. But it seemed to be one of the first questions people asked. And I would shut down the conversation by saying, why did you ask me that? You know, immediately the person would say, I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to be racist. And we wouldn't go any further because I shut down the conversation.
Yeah. Now, part of my asking you about the neighborhood that it happened in is sort of another way, maybe a little more subtle, but getting at like a economic class, and then you can just apply stereotypes from there or statistics. But maybe I was kind of getting at the same thing by asking those questions.
I probably, and I think I noticed during this whole journey, people want to know that this is not going to happen to them. When my mom was talking with some of her friends after it happened, and everybody was saying why it wouldn't happen to them. You know, like, I wouldn't happen to me because I hold my keys really tightly, and I'm looking around all the time. So, everybody wanted to come up with a reason why
they were in control and you weren't.
Right, exactly. Because if I can be beaten up in front of my kids at 7 p.m. at night, couldn't it happen to anybody? So I think that people were asking many different questions about the identity of the man who attacked me because they wanted to figure out, is this something that could happen to me? That was one of the reasons. There were many others. And, I didn't initially get to talk about them because I shut down the conversation. There was a moment when I realized...
Sounds like it made you feel defensive.
Yes, it made me feel defensive. And as a person who was brought up to be politically correct, or somebody who was brought up, who was told every day of my life we're all equal, I felt that it was my obligation to stand up when something was happened that I felt, I don't know, like if something happened and it felt as though people were being accused of doing something and it didn't seem fair to me, I felt that I needed to stand up for that person immediately. But what I didn't take into consideration was I knew nothing about race. I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts. They were all, the small town when I was growing up was a town full of Italian Americans. We had the last names of all of the restaurants, dry cleaners, etc., all ended in a vowel. There was maybe one Greek.
You had lots of good food, is what you're telling me.
I had lots of good food. In fact, when I went to Skidmore College and had Domino's pizza, I couldn't believe what I was eating.
Culture shock.
It was culture shock. I was so horrified. But I didn't have a lot of diversity in my childhood. And at this point, when people started asking me these questions, I realized I know nothing about this topic, and I need to learn more. And I need to approach this question differently. I need to ask why.
Can I cut you off? Let me ask you a few more context questions.
Sure.
It was a man, you said, correct?
Yes.
Was he apprehended? Was he caught?
No, he ran away, disappeared behind the store, and he was never caught.
You never figured out his identity, never saw him again?
No, I never saw him again. I never figured out his identity. I did tell my kids, and usually I don't tell them, I don't lie to them, but I felt that they needed to know that they were safe. So I said he must be in jail. I guess I didn't quite lie to them, but I led them to believe that he had been apprehended because they were so afraid, and I thought that they needed some kind of closure. But it was a tricky time as far as they were concerned too, because I could never guarantee them safety anymore because I couldn't protect them. I didn't protect them. I didn't protect myself.
Has it changed you? As you go walking around down on this this blue and green rock of ours, and you go in and out of the Walmarts and the Targets and do your routine, knowing that you can't guard against everything. Has it changed you?
Initially, it changed me. I was terrified of I would have to. I looked everywhere when I was walking. I was looking all around me, and I was very, very afraid. But as time has passed, I no longer feel afraid anymore, and I'm pretty much living my life without fear. I mean, there's always something to be afraid of, but I try not to let fear get the best of me anymore.
Okay, and so how do you get from the punch in the face, the broken nose, the multiple punches, that trauma? We've touched on the racism, but how do you get to today of a person of no fear? Give me sort of the ultimate conclusion on how you got there, and then we'll back up to a few more details.
Sure. Well, you write a memoir.
You write a memoir, as simple as that?
Simple as that. No,
what if you have nothing interesting to say?
I think if you're living in fear and you're terrified of the world, you do have something interesting to say. I think we all have something interesting to say. It's a matter of getting it out there, writing it. But I don't know.
Isn't that what Facebook is for?
That's what Facebook is for.
Don't we do that on Facebook?
It's interesting. Facebook is fascinating, but Facebook to me doesn't feel real. Either we're arguing with each other, and let me give you an example of arguing. I posted something about the right to life. No, excuse me, the right to choose. And I posted it recently, and it definitely had what I believed on my post. It's, I believe in the right to choose as far as abortion is concerned. But at the bottom of the post, and I didn't even realize it, it had dirty, rotten Republicans on it. And I realized we are constantly, that's not what I wanted to convey. What I want to convey is I want to talk with everyone. I want to learn from everybody. And when when we post our opinions on Facebook in one-liners, and then they're sponsored by something else, we're often conveying messages that shut down conversation rather than actually inspire conversation.
Yeah, and sometimes talking about different things, because the abortion discussion can raise a whole number of values and considerations, and it can be very complex, and people want to look at it then very singularly and condemn one side. I've been a lawyer for 25 years. I've won cases. I've lost cases. I do my best to look at both sides of issues, but can never look at the other side like I look at my own. There's one thing I've learned. There's truth in both sides in almost every instance. Nobody sees the same thing, but you're helping people see some things maybe in themselves to help them live better. And when we come back, I want to get into how the book opened up those earlier experiences for you to face, write about, be so public about. We will be right back with the very courageous Christine Ristaino. I'm going to say it wrong again. Help me, Christine.
Sure, Ristaino.
Ristaino.
Like an I in
You're
between.
Jewish Italian. Ristaino. That'll help me remember. We'll be right back with Christine Ristaino.
Information that will make
Thank
your
you.
journey better and offer solutions to those issues that come with getting a little more experienced at life. That's Simply Senior, available at most pharmacies, your community senior center, or online at simplyseniorsnews.com.
The weekend is coming, and you need to plan a date night. You could go to a movie and dinner, but there's nothing original about that. Here's a new and exciting idea. Take your date indoor shooting at the Armory Gun Range. Instead of renting a bowling lane or playing miniature golf,
Yay.
you can rent a shooting lane at the Armory Gun Range. Impress your spouse or your date with your original plan. The Armory can provide both guns and ammo, and rookies are welcome.
I would be excited if my boyfriend took me shooting. The Armory is located in Sandy at 9210 South and 248 West. The phone number is 801-447-1789. Again, that is 801-447-1789. You can also check out their website at armoryshootingrange.com. The range is open from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Saturday.
The Armory Gun Range, blowing holes in boring date nights.
Stand by for exciting news from Affordable Mattress. Affordable Mattress has purchased truckloads of closeout beds from a national mattress firm. They have powered adjustable base beds for only $199. Queen-size pillow top beds, only $149. No interest financing and free delivery. 90th South, 1300 West in West Jordan, or call Darren 801-917-4555. That's Affordable Mattress, 90th South and 1300 West in West Jordan.
Welcome back to Talk with Ted, episode 37. Christine Ristaino.
Bravo. Perfect.
Still struggling with it. What is it? Dyslexic, they call it. Author on the phone with me. I'm going to do a little pitch for myself, Christine, before we get back to you. But I've got a couple of great guests coming up in the next month or so. Including my cousin magician Jeff McBride. We did a disaster show 4 or 5 weeks ago with failed technology, and we're going to try that one again. I'm going to have him on. We're going to do it just by radio, so he can't fool us with his magic tricks. Get his story.
Yeah, he's too distracted.
He is.
I can't even get the technical thing right because he mesmerized.
I'm going to have Terry Fossum on. Terry's an interesting guy. He is a retired executive officer for an entire group of nuclear B-52 bombers, a former U.S. Air Force guy, self-made millionaire, grew up with nothing, very poor town in Texas. He's into martial arts, reality television, the Boy Scouts of America, fascinating guy. I'm also going to have on another guest whose name I hacked up a week or so ago, and I'm going to hack it up again right now. But many Utahns will know him, football player, legend, Weber State legend, Tawa Pupua. He is a football player turned opera singer. And in this small world of ours is coincidentally Christine, friends of mine, or a mutual friend of mine, a woman that is from New York but moved to Italy to study and teach music. And they sang together, I think even 10 years ago, and have known each other. And so I'm going to have another Italian connection on the program.
Fantastic.
But right now we've got a Skidmore connection, and we're talking about your book being released today, All the Silent Spaces. Talking about how racism inspired it, and then what did it evolve into?
So it started, how I started was I decided to approach the question about race differently. And I started asking nicely, could you tell me why you asked that question? And then I started writing down the conversations that we had. After I'd have a conversation about race, I'd write it down. And I just decided, even if I looked naive or uninformed, I would ask these questions rather than remain silent and politically correct about them. So I started asking all kinds of questions that I had been afraid of asking before, and writing down I'd write the piece down, then I'd hand it to the person I had the discussion with. They'd tell me if I got it right or if I totally misunderstood, and then would go from there. Sometimes I'd write a second piece, or sometimes I'd revise it.
Interesting to check the accuracy of language and whether you're talking about the same thing.
Right. I really wanted to learn from this experience. I felt if I can learn from this, then it wasn't as devastating as it feels, the attack in front of my kids. And so I was on a quest to write a book as a white woman about race. But maybe a year and a half, 2 years into it, a friend of mine made me realize that this was about a lot more than race. I had written an introductory piece about, it was a letter to the attacker. And at a certain point, I said, I wonder what my daughter thinks about this. I looked away from her. I wasn't looking at her after the attack. Did she feel like I was ashamed? Did she interpret, my reaction as fear, as shame, all of these negative words? And my friend said, Christine, a little girl doesn't feel like this. Maybe she's afraid, but, she's not going to be ashamed about something like this. She doesn't even get what happened. She's just afraid and worried about you. And I said, no, it's the only time that I put Maddie's reaction to the, my daughter reaction to the attack into this book. And my friend said, no, Christine, this isn't how a little girl would react. And we went back and forth about that. And she said, maybe you're feeling ashamed. And all these bells and whistles went off. And I said, oh my gosh, this little girl isn't my daughter. The little girl is me. And I realized at that point I needed to go back and look at the violent things that had happened to me as a child. And I reread my book, and there was this shame, that this pervasive shame running through, the words that I had.
And that's
put
what
into
prompted this conversation with the friend?
Well, the conversation, we were writing partners, and so she was reading my piece and giving me feedback, and I was reading her work. And so her feedback was, this doesn't sound right. And it wasn't
that
right.
She prodded that, and that is what struck a chord with you?
Yes. And so I changed it. The book was called Conversation, and then I changed it to The Little Girl Is Me, because the little girl was me. At that point, I realized I'm the little girl, and that I had been driven to write this. I couldn't figure out why, but I was just writing this book. And there were all these people talking about their experiences with violence, their experiences with racism. And they were talking with this strength and dignity. And I was so in awe of them, and in awe of how they were sharing these difficult things. And I realized that I couldn't do that I had never done that. And this book was the way I was doing it. I was compelled to write this book, and I didn't know why.
Were you participating in any support groups or anything after the attack?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I looked for a support group, and, I was looking for support groups after the attack, for somebody who had been attacked, and I found support groups on rape. I found support groups for people who had experienced domestic violence. I said there was
not your boilerplate mugging.
Yeah, but the funny thing about it was these other two groups were perfect for me, but I was so in denial about the other two events. I didn't even recognize it.
Really?
Yes.
You had just segregated it, and then these aren't for me. So
yes,
you didn't do those groups?
No, I didn't even think I needed them. I was super in denial about the other two events. Did you treat
with any mental health provider, any kind of counselor or psychiatrist?
I did. I did go to counselors, but I really wasn't.
After the punch in the face?
Yes. I brought my kids. So my kids had a really tough time, and my son slept in my bed for years after this happened. He could not sleep alone. My daughter was crying every night, and she started drawing pictures of ambulances.
Tell me again how old they were when it happened.
They were 3 and 5 when it happened.
Little.
And I realized our family was just falling apart. I would jump at I would see a plant out of the corner of my eye in my house, and I'd jump about a foot. We were just in bad shape. So I made an appointment for my kids to go to counseling, and I brought them to counseling. And it was all about them. I think my whole life it's always been about getting the help for other people. And as soon as I realized this book was about more than just this attack, I realized I had to tell my family, my parents, my brothers, about these first 2 events.
And on the first 2 events, I asked you just a moment ago about therapy. Had you ever been in therapy prior to the punch in the face in 2008 for the earlier incidents?
Yes, I did go to therapy, but I really didn't connect with my therapist. And I think it was because I wasn't ready to talk about it. Yeah, I was going and I would mention it, but then I didn't know what to do at that point. I wasn't
You
used
needed
to
age. You needed a few more years under you to
I
put
needed
it all in
age.
context, right?
Did your therapist help much at that
Exactly.
point? Christine,
true.
did your therapist help much at that point?
At that point, she didn't. I had such a hard time talking about my own problems. I was very good at helping people with theirs, but I didn't know how to talk about
Was your
my
counselor-
struggles.
Did you have any other issues? Did you have any depression, or were there any other manifestations of trauma associated with the, the incident when you were 8 or 9, as well as in college?
Well, I did have moments of mild depression, but I think that the main result of this event was that I couldn't hear my own voice, and I didn't know who I was, and I just wanted to please everybody. And that went on for so many years. But as soon as I told my family about this event, it was amazing how quickly I started hearing my own voice, and amazing how quickly I stopped mediating and started saying my own truth. It was so fast, Ted. So I told my family about these events. We talked about them. Suddenly, the black line that I had denied for years over everybody else's truth was out there. And I began talking about my own truth because I could feel it. I could feel it in my stomach. I could feel it in my heart. I felt it in my brain.
Including the identity of the person that had molested you when you were a child?
Yes.
The family
in fact,
friend.
I do not talk about who he is in my book. I just call him the man because it's interesting. Being a person who has survived molestation, a lot of times molestation happens and you love the person who did it to you. And our society really does a poor job talking about this because they talk about somebody who's done something like this and say that this person is a monster. And as a result, the family and the person who was molested can't talk about it because they look at that person and they say, this person isn't a monster. So this must not have happened.
Yeah, you see that same, in some sort of analogous way with the church and the Catholic Church and the trust and authority that priests hold, and some, very deservedly so. And then the community looks at them differently, skeptically. It creates real conflict for everyone.
Yeah. And it really does. And I think we have to change that paradigm from good and evil or good and bad or good and monster, that paradigm, and say that people can do public good and private bad. And because otherwise, the person who experienced it at the hands of a loved one has a hard time talking about it, admitting it, accepting it. And then the relatives of that person, the families, there's terror. I was terrified my whole life that people wouldn't believe me, that my family wouldn't believe me. And there was this awful fear of rejection as a result.
We see that play out, in the Bill Cosby case.
Yes.
It's easy with the passage of time to say that you're a liar. As a lawyer, with the passage of time, your memory's going to fade, and then we can always say, well, why didn't you just step up sooner? So I think that just creates a momentum for more and more silence.
Right. And right, as soon as somebody says, why didn't you say that sooner? Anybody who's thinking of coming out and saying that they had experienced sexual violence is going to think twice about it, because you suddenly become the bad guy. You're suddenly, and as a person who had experienced molestation at the hand of somebody I and my family loved. Well,
and especially in the myriad, so many unimaginable ways that it can happen. Mm-hmm. From date rape to opportunity with a babysitter to you name it. Right.
And when you have that information about somebody, it's this information that can hurt people you love. So what do? For me, I kept it inside because I didn't want to hurt my family. I had this information that could hurt them, but I realized I had lost myself in the process. And in order to
end up taking all the pain for everyone else, Christine.
Right, exactly. Taking the pain for the team. And, I went my whole lifetime without a voice. And when I finally started hearing my voice, it's a very strange process. It was beautiful. It's like falling in love, because suddenly you hear this person who's been hiding away your whole life, and suddenly she's there.
When did that happen? What year was the epiphany?
Well, it was probably a few years into writing this book when I finally told my parents and my family about what had happened to me when I was young, and really my whole place in the world switched from being a mediator to somebody who was active in her own life and had a voice and could use it to make positive change in her life.
Isn't it amazing? A punch in the face. To get that, I'll call it midlife purpose out of you.
Yes, it took that. And it took a punch in the face and having people witness it also, because I was really good at not looking at the things that had happened to me. But there was, my children saw it, and their reaction was so upsetting. And I could see in their faces that what had happened was horrible. And then a woman ran up to me afterwards, and she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "It's okay, I'm okay." And she looked at me straight in the eyes, and she said, "It's not okay, and you're not okay. I saw it."
You just denied it right away. It was okay, and you were okay.
Yeah, but she told me, "No, it's not okay, and you're not okay. I witnessed the whole thing. This is not okay." Hearing that from somebody else was powerful.
I'm just looking at the commercial here. We got. We're going. There it is. We're going into the last commercial break. I'm going to be kind of coy and clever here. You just said that you love yourself. We're going to put that maybe at jeopardy if I ask you to stay on for one more segment. Hopefully you'll still love yourself, even if you stick with me through the final one. Christine Ristaino.
Perfect.
Got it again. I'm on a roll. Great guest. I'm a little blown away. We're going to hear more about your book, All the Silent Spaces, when we're back after this commercial break. Welcome back to Talk with Ted on 1640 AM K-Talk Media, Salt Lake City, Utah. It's 5:43. We've got 17 minutes to wrap it up. It's always the fastest 2 hours of the week is what it feels like. Especially when I've got a guest like Christine Ristaino, author of, I got it again, of All the Silent Spaces. And we're talking about your great book, Your Fascinating Life. If I had more time, I'd get into your professorship and the life of being a college professor. You told us about a trip to Italy with some kids. That sounds amazing. And in my alternative life, I wish I was a college professor. But at least I'm talking to one. And I read a little quote from your book, The Introduction 10-Year Anniversary, which was lovely. It's really a beautiful book, a beautifully written book. But then right after that, I find curious, and I've got to ask you about this. You've got a definition on a separate page. This is before the book starts. Retrogression defined. Retrogression, noun. 1, the act of retrogressing. Movement backward. 2, biology, degeneration, retrograde metamorphosis, passing from a more complex to a simpler structure, and you cite the dictionary. Why do you highlight that word and that two-part definition?
So I intersperse my book with retrogression. So my book starts right after the attack. And the retrogressions, and my book starts after the attack and moves forward in time, and it ends fairly recently, actually. But the retrogressions start after the attack, and they move backward. So they go from after the attack, and they move all the way to the experience I had at 8 or 9.
Back in time, so the book's moving both ways in time?
Yes. Exactly. And I did that. I wasn't quite sure why I was doing that, but initially. But it became more clear to me that I had to go backwards in order to move forward. And so I had to look at these events that happened long, long ago in order to really figure out who I was and who I wanted to be in this world. And so the retrogressions are
searching for backwards. A simpler form of you. Is that accurate to reading this definition?
A simpler form of me, but also a simpler form of what happened. Because when you close the door on something that's big in your past, it gains momentum behind that closed door, and it becomes huge. It becomes like a storm. And it becomes more and more complicated. You know, I spent years thinking, what if somebody finds out? What if this happens? Playing out every scenario that could possibly happen if this information were to get out into the world.
Did it affect your relationships, dating and men? You alluded to that a bit earlier.
It affected relationships that were not good relationships. For example, if somebody tried to do something that I didn't feel like I didn't want to do, like in the rape situation, I would just freeze, and I would lose all my power. You know, like I don't know. I've read before that often happens to people who have experienced violence.
I hadn't even thought of that. The relation of one to the other. We didn't.
Yes. In fact, when I was raped, I froze, and all that I kept thinking about was this earlier moment in my life.
And how old were you then? Were you 20 or so, 21?
21, about 21. I think I was I was 21 years old. I had just turned 20. And, yes, they are connected. And so I forget where I was going with that, but they're definitely connected, and so going back to a simpler time in my childhood, but also going back to, it's kind of like Occam's razor, you know, exactly what it is and nothing more. I think when we don't talk about things, the story becomes bigger and bigger in our mind, And so to go back to the core of what it was. And I think when we talk to people about the complexities of life, we understand each other better. By talking about race, by talking about violence, talking about all these different things, difficult things, death. When we talk about it. Addiction, exactly.
Yeah, death is a big denial one.
That's a big denial one, addiction?
No, death.
Death, absolutely. People think there's a formulaic 3 months and then you're supposed to be over anything that happens to you. But really, it takes a long time to heal from things. And I found that the best way to heal was to talk to people about these events. And when people bear witness to a story, when they listen as though they have nothing else to do on that day but listen, that's powerful. And that's when, for me, that's when I felt my voice. That's when I felt my truth. And that's also when I felt heard.
It's just interesting. Facebook, we just mentioned it a moment ago, and most people on Facebook, post their sort of happy things and put that good spin on it. But occasionally you see people also putting on Facebook, very private, personal, sometimes hurtful things. And you can sometimes have that instant reaction to like cringe, to feel bad for them. Like, oh no, you're putting that out there. But I think we need to kind of have a new frame of mind, that if people are doing that, they need help, and you heal from sharing your struggles.
Storytelling is so powerful. That is one thing I do like about social media, is that if somebody's going through a tough time and they post about it, then we know that they're going through a tough time. And when you think about the Me Too movement, there were thousands and thousands of people saying Me Too for the first time in their lives. And that must have been terrifying for them, but also liberating and empowering.
Yeah,
when you think about those words.
I see people on LinkedIn.
So
There's this one kid in particular that I see. He's unemployed down in Texas, and he posts quite regularly about depression and mental health with men in particular. And being unemployed, you see unemployed people on there, posting the resume, asking for jobs. When there's otherwise, kind of shame also associated with being unemployed. And so there's sort of a new courage, if you will, I think, evolving in the media. And certainly your book underscores that, because I don't know what could be more courageous than coming forward with the details that you have.
Thank you, Ted.
Yeah, it's really extraordinary. When I touched base with you, I thought this is going to be a really easy interview.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate your bearing witness to my story. It means everything, to be able to share. I think about this story, and I could barely tell it years ago. And then now I'm talking with you, talk with Ted McBride, and there's an audience for your show. And at one point, I spoke in front of 6,000 people at a Me Too march, and it's amazing how easy it is now to talk about this, and how, in contrast to how hard it was years ago. I could barely say it or even admit it.
Yeah, it's changed. What's interesting is I had Stuart Goffman, the creator of A&E Addiction Unplugged, and he's got a television show coming on highlighting all these people doing great things with addiction across the country. And he credits the younger generation, just no shame in the younger generation with their mental health issues or their struggles, and kind of laughing at the older generation about covering theirs up. And I think for us, Christine, being middle-aged and having, these experiences and sort of the support of that cultural change and these platforms and so many people willing to do it, I think it's going to make a lot of people feel better.
Well, thank you. I teach at a college, and I just love my students for that reason, for many, many reasons. But that's one. They're just so open about who they are, and they're so beautiful in their honesty and courage. And they've inspired me to be more courageous. In fact, a lot of my healing happened because of my students. Because they're courageous, they're open, they're brave. They can do anything, and they make me feel like I can do anything too.
Wow. I took 2 years of Spanish at Skidmore. The third semester, we had a visiting professor. He could barely speak English. I got away with murder. I didn't learn a thing. So the fourth semester came. I studied to skate with a C- to get by. But that's one of my regrets at Skidmore is that I didn't learn a language or a better Spanish. But maybe it's not too late. Is that what you're telling me?
No, it's not. I did poorly in French at Skidmore.
French you took, huh?
I struggled. I really struggled. It wasn't until I figured out how I learned that I was able to do well at a language.
Was that because you moved there?
I have a hard enough time mastering the English language. I'll focus on that one.
English is hard. I agree.
Where do you go from here to promote the book? What do you do next?
So I'm going to be in the Decatur Book Festival. And Decatur is a town nearby. It's in Georgia. And they have this incredible book festival at the end of August, early September. It's 3 days long. And it's every author's dream to be, in the area at least, to be speaking at the festival. So I'm really excited about that. And Emory's going to have an event for me at the bookstore. And I'm thrilled about that. And I need to do some homework because I need to reach out to more bookstores and see if I can go and speak or sign books there. I just got back from Italy a week ago, so now I'm on to the next project, and that's called Assailant Spaces.
And you've also published or co-authored a couple of other things that I can't pronounce.
Lucrezia Marinella. She's an Italian woman writer, and she wrote during the Inquisition. And it's interesting, Ted. I wrote my whole dissertation on her and then published a book. And basically, my book was about how she found subtle agency during the Inquisition. And I wrote about finding agency. And I think that's pretty... it makes a lot of sense because I didn't have a lot of agency.
When you say finding agency, what do you mean by that?
Agency, finding a voice. Finding some way to get your point across when it's really hard to do. Like during the Inquisition, Lucrezia Marinella talked about the poor treatment of women, but during the Inquisition, you could lose your life for doing something like that. And she did it subtly. She had to employ a number of different. Basically, she had to employ a number of different traditions, literary traditions, in order to do that. And in my life, I was doing something similar. But of course, I didn't see that back then. It's funny when you look back at your life.
You uncovered your own code?
Yes, definitely.
And then you wrote in a way where it didn't need to be in code. You're pretty open and honest about it.
Right. Now I don't need to speak in code. And I'm really happy about that. My life is very different as a result.
Wasn't Skidmore College a great place?
Yes, it was a wonderful place to go to college. I have a lot of good memories. I wouldn't be here in Atlanta without Skidmore. I wouldn't have gone to Seattle without my friend Sarah from Skidmore. We picked a city and moved there, and it led to meeting my husband. It led to all kinds of great things. And the experiences at Skidmore were unbelievable. I feel like we had a lot of great opportunities. Now,
and even then, it was a dying breed, the liberal arts education.
It's great to have a liberal arts education.
What's that?
It's great to have a liberal arts education.
Yeah, well suited to be a professor.
Yes, after Skidmore. Although I should have taken advantage of a lot more opportunities at Skidmore, I've got to say. I could have done a lot more.
My big regret was not playing college basketball. I wanted to party instead. So,
Oh,
But that motivated me and kind of changed my life. And here I am today. Here we are 30 years later talking about experiences, mental health. I really cherish your story, Christine. I'm honored that I had you on the day that your book was released. I'm slack-jawed at our discussion. I learned something from every guest, and it'll digest everything that I take away from here.
thank you, Ted, so much for having me on your show. It was a real honor.
Last
And a
pitch.
joy.
People have a hard time selling themselves. Why should people buy this book?
Everybody has a story to tell, and everybody's been through difficulty and struggle. And this book is about coming to terms with these difficult things. It's about when your life is spinning out of control and what you do to move forward. And it's messy. It's not easy. Life is messy though. And so if you've been through difficult things and you want to read a book that talks about somebody who has been through some tough things as well and how she moved forward, this is the book for you.
Well, I'm not going to read it because I've never been through anything difficult.
Okay,
My
fair
life's
enough.
just
Ted.
been a breeze. That's a joke. I am going to read it, but this interview was not difficult. Thank you for that pleasure. And I'll follow up with you, get you a link, and to follow you back on the Facebook social media realm.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine Ristaino. Did I get it right again?
Yep.
Ristaino.
Ristaino. I got it wrong the last time. It'll for the record.
We'll just call you Christine.
All the silent spaces. You can get it on Amazon. Great guest. Thank you for listening, folks. I'm running over the commercial breaks, but just a lovely ending with a very courageous woman, and I think that those issues touch everybody similarly to mental health and other things. There's not a family out there that's not touched by some tragedy similar to Christina's. So incredibly inspirational stuff. Court tomorrow. I'm going to take next week off. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with a surprise guest. Talk with Ted, show about nothing. Thanks for listening. Drive safe, folks.